Okay, I'm gonna have to rely on your help. Remember, this is not a channel where I teach you things. It's where you teach me things. Okay, so are Mexicans biracial? I may have asked this before, but not in 2018, not with the insight I have now, but I'm still confused on whether Mexicans are biracial. That's something that we recently talked about as far as people who are black versus being biracial. Was President Obama our first black president, or was he simply the first biracial president? That was a conversation we had earlier this week, and it made me think about Mexican people. Now, let me give this disclaimer, because I know there's people who want to get too technical and make this not fun, and say, well, Nick, there's people of Chinese descent living in Mexico. There's people with blonde hair, blue eyes in Mexico. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what America, United States, deems as people who are Mexican. When you live in Tennessee or Alabama, where I grew up, and you'd see people working in a Mexican restaurant because they came from Mexico. In other words, people who have the Native American DNA, Mayan, Aztec, etc., mixed with the European DNA, which is probably much of that being Spanish. There's that hybrid. There's that biracial group of people. I'm not talking about the nationality of being Mexican. I'm talking about whatever the right word I'm supposed to use for it is. For someone who lives in America and thinks about Mexican people, there's an image that comes to mind. Do I need to give you one? Fine. Napoleon Dynamite, the guy that plays Pedro, a Mexican American guy, but that ethnic makeup. There we go. Now that we've got the disclaimers out of the way. To me, very obviously, someone who's Mexican, according to those terms, is going to be biracial. Because the European DNA, that's one race, right? And then we've also got the Native American via Mexico, indigenous, whatever you want to call that, which no one's really argued with me that they are descendants of Asian people. Granted, the DNA is much different now, but if they got here 10,000 years ago via the Asian population, we all agree, don't we, that if we, and a lot of people say, well, Nick, races don't exist, it's arbitrary. I get that, I totally understand that. But for those of us who do believe that race, even in an arbitrary way, actually exists, then we would say that someone who is Amerindian or Native American or Aztec, or whatever you want to call that, that's a different race than people from Europe. So when you've got a group of people, many of whom, if not most of whom, are that ethnic mix, that's biracial. It's the same thing for me in my mind. If there was someone who was, say, Filipino, and they married someone who was Irish, and they had a child, that would be a biracial child. Because one was of Asian descent, one was of European descent, biracial. There you go. But, and I've said it before in my channel, there are certain nations that exist in which that is the norm. And I've mentioned Mexico as being one of those. You know, yeah, United States is a very ethnically mixed group of people, but not so predictably two exact things in the way that, for example, Mexico is. I'm convinced that Mexican people, again, not the nationality, but the actual genetic DNA that makes up most Mexican people, biracial. Is that not common knowledge? For me, it's always been common knowledge that that's what Mexican people are. They're clearly not Spanish. Spanish people are European. And they're clearly not just simply the natives that lived there for 10,000 years or however many thousands of years it was. They're both. They're both. And even my own DNA test shows that I'm 21.6% of that Native American via Mexico. And that's for me having a Mexican grandma who apparently, by those standards, would have been closer to 80% of the Native American, the Central American, and very little European. So Mexicans are biracial. So then that lends itself to the question, so then what about me? Having a Mexican grandmother, and of course she was born in America, so I understand that she was a first generation Mexican American, but she came from parents who, for who knows how many generations, as long as had come from Mexico, right? And all of that. I feel like that's kind of how this channel is. It's like when I want to have a conversation, I have to like, okay, let me pull out all the stops. There's going to be someone who's technical about this and technical about this. But I think for most people watching the video, you get it, don't you? Mexicans are biracial people. I know that Mexican is not. I know it's just a nationality. I know that. Calm down. Okay? But am I biracial? By default, MyHeritage says I'm 21.6% Central American. Does that make me biracial? How much, what does it take to be biracial? Exactly. I mean, I guess in my mind, biracial means one parent is this race and one parent is this race. Bam. It's 50-50 and then there's the child. But, you know, we could argue, if we're saying I'm 21.6%, you know, of a different race than European, then again, what about African American people? We know, I've made many videos and people who are African American have validated my theory that if you're an African American, you take a DNA test, expect to be between 2/3 and 3/4 African. Expect that to be the norm. If you're more than that, that's actually the exception to the rule, because most African American people who've taken the test and have commented on my videos have agreed 2/3 to 3/4 African DNA is the norm. Okay? So even that by standard would mean biracial, right? Well, no, because both of their parents were black, were African descent, mostly. So finally then we get to, okay, well then you've got one parent who's black and then one who's white, but even the black parent is still only 3/4 to 2/3 black. So if they have a child, perhaps the African DNA wouldn't be that much more than what I am of Central American. So how am I not biracial compared to someone who is half black and half white, who's biracial? Depending on how black the one black parent was. I think that is confusing. And I think that is open ultimately to a matter of perception by the people asking the questions and answering the questions, in the same way that it goes back to, was President Obama our first black president, or was he simply our first biracial president? And I think it depends on who you ask. You're going to get different. It's all about perception, isn't it? Which goes back to why so many people leave comments on my videos saying that ethnicity and race is ultimately a made-up system, a racist system, arbitrary. Yeah, but it also still exists too, and I'm not going to deny that, especially as so many people identify as that. You know, if you're African American, if you're black, you're proud to be that. If you're Asian American, you're proud to be that. You know, that's part of what I think a lot of people who are not American don't understand about Americans. We're proud to be Americans, and we're also proud of our DNA, because we like, as this melting pot, we like to deconstruct ourselves and think, well, I'd like to know in what way I can feel special. Where exactly did my ancestors come from? How do I identify? Because if nothing else, our own government reinforces it when they have us do those forms and they say, are you white? Are you Hispanic but not white? Which is a confusing question for my mom and me. Are you Asian? We're taught that to be that way, even though we're taught to believe, oh, you got to be colorblind, man. You shouldn't see color. Well, I agree that you shouldn't look down on someone because they're of a different race. You should see all races as equal and see all people as equal and treat people all the same in that way. But I think it's important not to deny how, as an American especially, how one's DNA is going to be part of their identity. And to deny that identity is not, that in itself, if anything was going to be racist, it'd be that, to deny that part of the person's identity. Oh, you're black? I didn't notice. Oh, you're Asian? I didn't notice. You know, I think there's definitely a difference there. So now you get to decide, because remember, I don't teach anything. People call me ignorant all day long in the comment section. I agree that I'm ignorant. That's the whole point of my channel. The whole point is I'm ignorant, but I'm open-minded, and I need you to teach me, and I'm trying to collect everyone's view of reality to understand such things. So in the comment section, what I want to know is, are Mexicans biracial? and don't get too technical talking about people who immigrated from different countries like Scotland or Korea or something. I'm talking about Mexican people. Are they biracial? Am I biracial? And then just for fun, I want to throw in the bonus. Was President Obama our first black president, or was he simply our first biracial president? What I think only matters this amount. What everybody else in the free world thinks and says in the comments probably matters more than anything. So I want to know what you think.